Welcome, everybody. Started in about 30 seconds. I wanted to thank administration, Matt and Rachel, for having us tonight, as well as the custodial crew and everybody who gave us a spot to open up. Steve up in the sound booth doing all the technical side with Sam. Thank you very much, Steve, for being here as well. A couple of quick housekeeping. Child care is located right behind that wall right there is the library. If you go right, no? Hospitality room, which is through. Thank you. Hospitality room, just go through those doors. If people come in and you see them coming in and they don't know what to do with children, that's a great place for them to be, is there. The restrooms, the nearest restrooms, there are restrooms in the office, and the office is just kind of right about there across the hall. You can't miss it. I think it's got green tile around it. You'll know that's the office entrance. So wanted to do that. Another thank you I wanted to give is thank school board members who are here tonight. I've seen come in, and I'll let Yandri speak briefly to that, but also Superintendent Grant, thank you for being here tonight as well. And Yandri, Communications Director, has a thing or two to share before we get going.
I'll just stand over here. Don't need to be in the center. But hi, my name is Yandari Chatwin. I'm the spokesperson for the district. Like Brian said, we're so glad to have so many of you today, and we're thankful to see some of our board members, our superintendent in the audience. We did want to let you know that the reason our board members are here is because hearing your feedback is really important to them. We have the online forum, we're getting feedback in other ways, but hearing it live and in person, that's the reason they're here today. The meeting will be run by Brian, and your questions will be answered by district staff, but we just wanted to give a shout out and thank our board members for being here to listen to the public feedback. That's so important.
Thanks, Yandri. Yandri just told me, my name is Brian Conley. I'm a direct boundaries and planning for the school district. And we're here tonight to, of course, have our first area information meeting. So thank you for being here. We do have more coming up over the next month and a half. Flyers, I believe, Jason, are they on the back table? Yes, on the back table right before you walk out if you want to spin those up as well. Yeah.
Brian, your mic's going in and out a little bit. I wonder if you move it up.
Does that help there? Maybe? Hopefully. Okay. Maybe if I stand a little more still, that will help too. First, about 25, 30 minutes of this time will be some slides. If you've been watching the school board meetings lately, you'll see some repeat, but it's that common knowledge. There, I do have a handful of new slides in here as well, so some of the information will be different, but we're going to spend about the first 25 to 30 minutes with that, and then we will move into question and answer time. What we can answer, we will certainly answer. What we can't answer, we'll make note of and try to get answers as we move meetings. So, our boundary and population study. We're just going to continue through this fall focused on the process of what we have. And when we look at our zoomed out view in our district, part of the reason we keep our focus process is we want to just simply put the services that we have in our district. I might just grab the regular mic here. Is this still cutting out? Okay. Okay, thank you. So, as we take a quick look at this first slide, I think it's important to just remember that we are trying to really be responsible to not only first and foremost our students, our community, our employees, but to all our taxpayers in our school district. And like many cities, our school district is our city. The boundaries are the same. These 200,000+ people that pay taxes in Salt Lake City are in some way connected to Salt Lake City School District. About 30% of them are. And as I said, we're really trying to focus all of our efforts in the process on high-quality learning education. We know that strong schools, not just a strong school here and a strong school there, but many strong schools attract families throughout our city. That we can build that sense of community and trust by having strong schools, as well as draw in the business and industry that comes with that as well. So on this particular slide, what you're looking at is the percentage shown by the shade here, the percentage of people under the age of 18 that live in different areas of our valley and up into the Park City area. The lighter the color, the fewer students there are under the age of 18. You notice the real dark colors like Harriman, Riverton, South Jordan, that's where a whole lot of under 18-year-olds live. And it gets a lot lighter. Salt Lake, Park City, and Murray are the three lightest color because, simply put, even though we want to think that that we have a lot of kids here compared to areas around us and also compared to what we've had in the past, that just isn't the fact. And we have an aging population in Salt Lake City, and our data and data from other sources says that's going to continue to happen. So this graph right here goes back to 1950-51 school year. Baby boomers peaked in the district in the late 50s. They started coming to school right about where this graph started, peaked right up here. Then Gen X students started in 1965-ish, right around there. You can see what happened from 65 to 78. And then millennials, right around 1981, is where they started coming to school and enrollment started to even out. We do know that it holds true also here is what we've seen elsewhere or around the country as millennials have had fewer children than any of the other generations before them. So we look at this and the question obviously pops into the mind is what did our school district do from 1963, 1964-ish till about 1978? They closed schools. Here were the schools that were closed. This is K-12, not just elementary. You'll see some junior highs in there. And so schools just closed. And they went through whatever process they had in place at that point. You see some on there that you're saying, wait, Ensign. It didn't close, we still have an Ensign. The old Ensign, for example, is where the Sweet Library branch is right now up in the avenues, roughly a mile away from where it is now. But old schools closed, schools and new schools opened, and this gives you an idea of what happened during that time. You can see a big glut of where nothing really happened in some of those years as far as school closure. as well. That happened at a couple points. So another depiction of this with just our K-6 enrollment. We've lost about 3,800 students in 8-year period. The most recent 8 years, almost most recent, up through 2022, 2014 to 2022. During that time, none of our elementary schools have closed. 0. So, what our boundary and population study aims to do is to right-size our schools. And it really means we want to establish our boundaries around each of our schools that support a neighborhood student population at each elementary school that allows for about this average of 3 general education teachers per grade. We know that kids don't come in nice, neat packages of 25 students or 20 students, however many we're trying to get at a particular school. So sometimes you'll have two classes in one grade, 3 in another, 4 in another. We're looking for this average, which right now, that's not where we are. Fewer than half of our schools have, our elementary schools have this right now. Some have parts of it, but fewer than half have all of it. And so right sizing will help us put the building blocks and pieces in place for high quality learning environments to start to grow. And they already exist in pockets at different grade levels, at different schools in different places. We want to become more systematic and systemic with it. And part of the way we can do that is by trying to get a school that is the right size, not too big, not too small. I believe in the board meeting, just because I heard from one of the, I don't know why they were watching, but I said we don't want Harriman-sized schools. And I didn't mean to speak disparagingly of Harriman, or didn't think I was, but I was told I was. So we don't want those really large schools like we see in some parts of the valley. And at the same time, we don't want them so small that we're also suffering that way. So we think that our elementary schools, again, benefit in these ways. We've talked about those, and that's been a talk. This slide has been a talking point for the last 3-4 months when I came out to individual schools as well as board meetings. So what's written in blue at the bottom really says it all. We want a high quality seat for every student. Previous actions of our boundary study have been outlined briefly here. This process has been more active at some points, a little bit slower at some others, that July to February. Not a lot of, there wasn't public meeting time, anything like that. That looks a lot different than what we're having starting going into this fall. It gets a lot more lively and a lot more interaction time with people as we head into the fall. We did, as a boundary options committee, which was part of those, part of that process, it did come up with recommendations that were based on the 16 considerations. There have been some questions. What did that look like? The Boundary Options Committee convened, and we spent the majority of our time in that first 8 hours, as well as their independent time. The members reviewed notes, asked questions, and reviewed concerns, shared at each of the school's spring meetings. I went to all the meetings, took notes. We also had comments that came in from about 700 people during that time. As we read through that, or excuse me, about 500 at that point, we read through all that. And we were learning from each other, the expertise that each of the committee members brought. It was about data. It was quantitative, it was qualitative, and that's where we spent some time learning. Then we went through multiple rating exercises. One of them is up on the website if you'd like to look at that as an example, but the data itself wasn't changing. It's how we were trying to look at what we were seeing and also how we were trying to share that. The data is on that spreadsheet. So I'll show you at the end where you can get into some of that and see that. We wanted to really dig into and look at these considerations here. There was no I think that as this process, people sometimes look for an easy way to describe what's going on. And unfortunately, sometimes some people described it as, what's our score? Where are we on the scorecard? There was no, hey, in one of the exercises, sure, we were given numbers trying to say, which schools would we put in our bottom third in this area right here, our bottom third on facility capacity and design, and which would we put in our top third? And then we looked at it in different ways and had deeper conversations about each of those schools. So it didn't come down just to any one score for one school, but a combination of really all these factors being talked about and saying, which are the schools that we're going to recommend to study more? We needed some schools to study more. So we looked at the data, we considered community feedback, and we tried to really create that holistic assessment of schools. We knew as a committee that we needed to recommend about 7 schools for further study, because if 7 elementary schools in our district were to close, not saying they are, we're just saying that if they were, if it was 7 out of 7, we would be averaging then, with this year's students, about 470 students per school. And 470, when you look at most of our schools, not all, but most are built right around for 600 to 650 students. You say, gosh, you got a lot more room for students in there. But we were also trying to figure in discretionary space for the Beverly Taylor Sorensen's art teacher and the resource teacher and the music teachers and people like that. So trying to leave enough space in each school to also have some discretionary space in there. So we thought, whether it's we recommend for further study, whether we recommend 7, 8, somewhere right around there, we know we're going to be about where we need to be to move that process forward. Some of you in the communities have asked about the 2020 U.S. Census data. And we looked at that census data. We also looked at our in-district data and data from some projection data from Applied Economics. Census data does come with some. It does come with challenges, and that makes me where we got from there was that feeling of it was a lot less accurate, and I'll show you on this example here. Which school it is doesn't even really matter. It speaks to the point that we were trying to make about the data when we talked at our board meeting. So there are challenges that emerge when we try to use the 2020 U.S. Census data. First of all, census data boundary areas aren't the same as school boundary areas. This particular school is in red, and that's their boundary areas. The census data, these red marks right here, are for where the census data divides. This is 2 blocks of census data, but it's pretty close. We know that in talking to city planners, that the U.S. Census data, the accuracy was questioned due to COVID and the challenges that brought with collecting that data. We know that was a factor in 2020. What we don't know from the U.S. Census data, for example, was how many 5 to 12-year-olds go to a public school in our district, because it does give us a pretty good idea of how many 5 to 12-year-olds live in an area, but it doesn't say this student goes to a private school, this student is homeschooled, this one goes to next door to Granite District. It doesn't tell us those kinds of things. Here's one that goes to a charter school. And the U.S. Census groups residences in age bands, they're in age bands of multiple years. So in the US Census, it would say, here's how many 0 to 5-year-olds live in this area. The problem with that is it really didn't get granular enough for us. It didn't just say, this many of them are 4-year-olds, this many of them are 3-year-olds. You can make some assumptions, certainly, and say, well, take all of them and divide by 5, and that's about how many you have in each one. And so we did mess around with that and look at it and try that. And for this particular school, it said there were roughly 600 K-6 residents in this area. Certainly enough in that area to say, whew, that's a full school right there by itself. But because of those other 4 challenges that we just got done talking about, we saw why the school, in reality, had just over half that number actually attending our public schools. Not just that school, but any school in our Salt Lake City School District. One of the years it had 328, the other year it had 302. So we're going, okay, that's only about 50, 60% right. Maybe we need to look at more. We ended up looking at 12 schools, and we kept seeing the same kind of thing, sometimes 50, 60% right, sometimes up to about 75% right. But our data and what we had gotten as projection data from Applied Analytics seemed to be getting us a lot closer. We even tried, hey, let's not look at an individual school, let's look at 10 schools because maybe they'll balance each other out a little bit with the numbers. Now, certainly the boundaries of our school don't exactly match these boundaries, but dang, they're pretty close. This down here is the census, US Census. Here's where our actual boundaries are. For the 10 red dots, those are elementary schools. The blue are high schools, so middle school, sorry. The green's high school. So we were just looking in the greater Sugar House area. We were like, okay, these boundaries match up pretty well. And what we found out was even pretty well wasn't really that close. 5,400 K-6 resident students, according to the US Census, we only had about 4,100 in our district. So as much as we think we can still, and we did glean some valuable information from the census data about, hey, overall, are we gaining more students? Are we losing kind of those big trends? As far as really getting down to the nitty-gritty of this part that we're starting now, what's happening over the next 2 months, our data from our information systems, which has been out there in board meeting minutes and other, we've got different enrollment, how many we have, and also in our schools, but also from the Applied Analytics report, that projection data, we just know we're getting a little bit better information from those right now. I will say that October counts are really crucial in the who we're serving morning, afternoon, all day, special education, how we're trying to also build pre-K as well according to the strategic plan of the district. So the district programs, include dual language immersion, magnet ELP, and our hub schools, special education hub schools. Those are our district programs. There are schools that have some programs that are school-based programs. For example, Ensign has CNA, curriculum and assessment, but that's a school, not a district program. Some schools have really built out maybe an arts program at their school that attracts people into it. And no, that wasn't because it wasn't a district program. Those were the big 3 that we looked at because those are the 3 that require from the district some sort of when they're put into place, what's the word that I'm looking for? They have to be approved at the state level, and so the word's escaping my mind. Assurances given for DLI, Magnet ELP, and for the hub schools. And so that involves some district involvement as well as some district training and district oversight at those schools for those right there. So we did look at those, but we didn't look at every school's individual school specific if they had one. I'm gonna keep going. I do want to have the majority of our time for question and answer. I did want to get to this so you understand where we're going for our further study, and then we'll take all your questions. For further study, we're looking into these 5 primary categories that represent critical principles that will guide the development and recommendations to the board. And ultimately, the district is going to keep trying to, that whatever recommendation comes out is going to be based on a holistic approach to determine which ones to recommend. We're in the study phase. We haven't made any recommendations, but we do think we want to try to, through all this, it's important and critical for us to balance the needs across the district because we have, at the elementary level, almost 10,000 students to serve, about 9,500. So, and then with our secondary schools, obviously, we'll be hopefully making some recommendations somewhere down the line to be looking at those, but right now our focus is elementary. So those 5 categories are student enrollment and residential population right now, proximity and availability of neighborhood schools. We have some areas where schools are packed in pretty tight with dwindling populations. We have other places where the schools are a little more spread out. The building and learning environment quality, that's the physical plant. Where and the strategic placement of district-wide programs for access and community input, part of what we're going to be hearing tonight through your questions and comments. So, these next, I'm not going to read every one of these. We saw them. I encourage you to go back to the board meeting if you'd like to hear them described a little bit more on that recording. But I do want to say that what you see on the right over here, that's the data that we're going to be collecting and looking into. And by we, I mean the district. District leadership, different people have different areas of expertise that can help us dig into and find these numbers. Some are with information systems, some is with auxiliary services, some of it's going to be with teaching and learning. We're going to have different areas we find and get this data, but we feel confident that we'll be able to find this on enrollment data, that we'll be able to find for proximity and availability of neighborhood schools, the student safety, transportation, and geographical features part. We also are relying on our connections that we've been making with city planners, city transportation, University of Utah housing, and family housing in that area. So we have our meetings that we've started, and we'll continue to have those. Environmental factors, that goes hand in hand with that city part, and community and neighborhood identity is another part that we want to be able to, whatever we end up with, if something shifts. If we close one school, if we close 7 as a district, of whichever, or if it's anything besides 0, we want to also have that sense of how are we moving forward and making that, helping that community be successful in its work toward becoming a new community with new community members. Here's part under building and learning environment quality. That's the data we're going to be coming up with and sharing and looking at. Here is more along that same one of building facility capacity and design. And again, these are all from last board meeting. Nothing, you're not seeing anything new on these slides right here. Here's strategic placement of district-wide programs. We're going to look at special programs, and the facilities we have for those special programs in more depth and collect this data. And of course, our community input and stakeholder feedback. We think that many of the questions and comments that come out of here are questions and comments that can apply in other places other than just schools in this immediate area. So all information is good information for us to collect from stakeholders. Our approach to boundary adjustments is, this is boundary adjustments once, we also have those recommendations for school closures that are in. This is about boundary adjustment. Obviously, 2 schools being recommended for closure makes for different boundary adjustments than 6, different than 5, different than 8, or 7, different than 4. So this approach to boundary adjustments will take these pieces into consideration. We are trying to look for, some people are saying, boy, that looks like a low number. Not if we have a special program in that school, not if we have a district program. That would, some of our district programs have upwards of 120, 130 kids in them. These are the different pieces we're going to be looking at for boundary change recommendations. There's these as well. And again, this is all repeat, but I encourage you to go back and take a look over that. These considerations are from G5, yeah. And and then it's, okay, let's look at those and say, how are we actually going to collect data on them? What does data collection really look like? And that's what this is. Oh, right, yeah. It is as a PowerPoint on, yeah, it'll say September 5th presentation, so if you don't want to listen to it all, yes. And our next steps for further study, here's where we are. We're going to compile and evaluate that data. We're going to capture and analyze the data listed in those tables I just showed you. Try to look at implications of that and obstacles that can't be overcome if a school is closed. That can influence one way or another. And a big focus will then be on creating a plan for transitions. And we do have, I should have put, I'm going to get to these last, this one right here in just a minute, number 6. But we do have our district website that will continue to update with this information as well, and the data as it comes available. If you'd like to leave a comment, when you go to our homepage, you're looking for this rolling screen that says Population and Boundary Study, and you're looking for this red button here, and when you click on it, it takes you to this page. And a lot of the data that I was just talking about is right underneath this area over here, as well as some frequently asked questions, things like that, when our next meetings are. I encourage you to do that. I also encourage you, when you leave a comment up here, about once every 2 to 3 weeks, the board does receive whatever's been submitted for comments to that right there. And the board will be seeing those considerations as well. Here are the meetings. Of course, we're on number 1 up here. It's on the information sheet in the back. Our timeline, the reason I wanted to get to this one, the writing's really small, but we are in this September, October of trying to hold area information meetings. We are going to have 2 public comment periods in board meetings in November, and also a board hearing in December. So we are also not listed up here on here, is I'll be going around to each one of the 7 schools that are further study and having some site-specific question and answer time in each of those schools as well. Principals should be, I think I know when 4 or 5 of the 7 want me to come, so you should start seeing those advertised pretty soon too for your school. If your school is one of the 7 that is being further studied, you'll be hearing something directly from your administration at that school about those meetings. So thank you, and I know there was a question Yeah, right back here. Thanks for holding
Hey,
on.
Brian, hi, just quickly. We actually are live streaming, yay. But in order to make the stream a little bit better, if we can have folks use the mic, that would be really helpful for the live stream. If you're not able to get to the mic, I'm happy to bring you this wireless mic. But thank you so much for helping us make sure that audio quality is as good as we can get it.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for the presentation. I had a couple terms that are getting used a lot that I am a little bit unclear on exactly what they mean. Student enrollment and residential population. I'm assuming that when you talk about a neighborhood school population, you're talking about the children that are in that neighborhood boundary that are actually enrolled in Salt Lake City School District schools. Correct? Not just the number of students of the appropriate age to be a student, meaning that students could be attending a private school or a charter school and live within the neighborhood boundary but not be enrolled in Salt Lake City Public Schools.
Yeah, so you'll see a number on there that student enrollment is how many, if we, and this isn't going to happen, this is just to visualize it, if we said, okay, every student has to go to the school that they're pointed to, or go to a charter, private, homeschool, something like that. If those were your people's only choices, then that number of student enrollment in that is the ones that are pointed right to that school that live in those current boundaries that go to a Salt Lake school right now, yes.
So the students who are attending private school or charter schools are not added into that residential student enrollment population.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll start with one and I'll hop in the back of the line. I've spoken to several teachers that are currently teaching in Salt Lake School District, mostly at schools that are being considered for closure. I've heard a lot of concerns about what will happen with their jobs and what will happen afterwards. So I guess my question would be, what are your intentions for those teachers? If we have the current number or the correct number of current classrooms, I would assume that it's going to be really important to retain as many of those teachers as possible. Will they be offered other positions? Will they have to re-interview for their jobs? What's going to happen there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Another set of meetings that we've just started, we've only done one of our 7 schools. We've asked administration at each of the 7 further study schools to let us come to a staff meeting with human resources. Logan Hall and Nate Elkins, who are administrators in HR, coming just to answer those questions for each specific school. There is a process in place for teachers. There are 5 different agreements that we have in our district with teachers, with custodial, with our classified, with anyway, 5 groups, and so there are processes that are in place there. We do think that though the movement could potentially be great, we do think the overwhelming majority of the teachers are going to be able to have an offer of something in another school, provided they've had a satisfactory end-of-year evaluation, for example. You know, of course, career teachers are going to be placed first, and then provisional after that, but that's no different than how we are right now. So that'll happen. I think where the tricky part comes is some teachers will be making decisions. They'll say, okay, I'm a 3rd grade teacher at this school, and I'm certified to teach K-6. I don't want to be a 1st grade teacher at that school over there. What are some other? There is a process written out in written agreement for the teachers that explains that process, and that's what HR is going through with each of the staff. But I think we're going to have maybe some that say, nope, I want to stay a 3rd grade teacher. It doesn't matter if I'm in Salt Lake District or not. I'll go to another district if I have to. We hope not. We hope we can. I think this is going to be, anytime you have change like this, it's going to be a challenge for teachers. It's going to be a challenge for the teachers going to the new school. It's going to be a challenge for building new, for that new sense of community in a new school with a new staff. I've done that as a principal. I've seen what that, I mean, I know that there are challenges, but there's also incredible opportunity in that. So we're trying to get the jump early, let teachers know now what the process will be, and that's what HR is going around doing.
Okay, I guess follow-up quick question. It sounds like most of them will probably be offered other positions, or you will try to retain them that way. I think the major concern is interviewing. Is your intention to make them re-interview for their positions?
My understanding, having been to one of the meetings, was that for career teachers, nope, it's, hey, we have had in the past and said, what is your preference, but we can't guarantee. Teacher might say, my preference is that school, or that school. And maybe it happens, but no guarantee. But it isn't, no, going through an interview process again, no. Now, for provisional teachers that aren't renewed, it's the same as what it's always been. They might be re-interviewing, but we've had that in place for a decade plus, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep this short. I think the elephant in the room for me is really why schools like Uinta, Ensign, Bonneville were not the targets when the schools in kind of the lower part of the valley were the targets. We live over just north of the 9th and 9th area, and if all 4 of the local schools are closed, then we are more than 2 miles away from the closest schools. So I'm curious as to how those schools weren't looked at. The other part of that too is the fact that this is the area of the city that is experiencing the most housing growth. I don't see them in the Harvard and Yale area putting down multi-unit, high-density apartment buildings as they do in this area. So I'm kind of curious to understand the thought process behind why we didn't look at the hills, the schools up on the hillside.
Yeah, thank you for your question. There's a long, I'm going to try to beat, I see a long line of people wanting to ask questions. So first of all, the schools that we do have are further study. Further study doesn't mean, yep, it's already a done deal, we're wasting our time, what are we even doing? It is meant to dig in and look at more and more data. When we looked at all 27, and we did look at them from the start, there are some schools that because of the reasons we had given up here, the CLCs, at some of those schools. We don't have CLC. You'd mentioned Uinta, I think you said Bonneville, maybe not, but East Bench. When we look at what is currently in their neighborhood, their current boundary, I know 2 of those schools, Uinta and Bonneville, still have over 400. So that was like, man, moving 400 students is a whole lot harder than moving 250. So part of it is that. Now, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there were 500 students in Uinta's boundaries. Now there's 400. Do I think in another 10 years, if things keep going at this rate, we're going to have another, hey, let's talk about school. You know, this isn't a one-time shot every 20 years, I hope. I'd rather see us tend to this every few years and stay on top of that. Doesn't mean a school closes every few years, but really dig into it every few years instead of waiting for something like this. Because I think we do have some schools in some areas that if things continue at the rate they are, another 5, 10, 15 years, yep, they're going to have to come to that too. The other part, the high density, what we have seen is that high density means fewer elementary age students. We've seen a lot of studio 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom places. In fact, out on North Temple toward the Metal Arc area, over the last 5 years, I think the number's right around 1,200 units we've seen there. We've gotten 22 students out of that 1,200 units, just 22. So that was as of last year. Don't know what it is this year. But We are working with the city. I've had a couple meetings with city planners. We're really trying to focus on where are townhomes being built because they tend to draw more elementary age families with elementary age students and 3+ bedroom apartments. We're trying to take now part of this further study is digging into, let's not just look at wherever they're building, let's look at ones where we're not only getting 2 kids here, 4 kids there, we're possibilities of more numbers. So it is something that's big on our city planners' minds. Does that equate over to the city council seeing the urgency to start issuing that? Is that part of the permit process? We need affordable housing. We need multifamily housing that's kind to families. We need, in our school district vision, we don't need any more studio apartments. Now, city council and other people in our city might say, yeah, we do, and we're going to keep building them. But from our perspective, we're trying to have that conversation with them.
Okay, one more quick question. How are you guys adjusting the administrative kind of cost? Because outside of the schools and closing schools, my assumption then that will trickle to the greater administration of the school district. If we cut schools, if students are down, why do we need such high overhead at that level? And how did we kind of account for that when we started building, for example, the new district office?
Right. I know school leadership, looking at on the school-based end, if we have 4 fewer schools, we have principals and assistant principals that we don't need at those schools. I do know,
more at the actual school
Right.
district level, not at
Right.
the school
Well,
administrative level.
okay, I just wanted to, yeah, we are working on that with school leadership. On the other piece, that will be part of the determination and recommendations that will come from superintendent and superintendency. Will be the cabinet taking a look at, do we have what we need? Do we have too much of what we need? Do we, those kind of pieces, do some adjustments need to be made? That's going to have to also be part of that domino afterwards, but I can't speak for what that's going to look like at this point, so it's a great question for us to keep considering.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Howdy, Brian.
Hi.
Let's see. So we talked about data a lot, or you talked about data a lot. So I'm a data guy, so I've got a few questions. Is that better?
Yeah.
There we go. So 27 schools, 16 variables. That's a lot of predictors in your model for that sample size, right? Like it sounds good about quantification. We're going to look at all these things. We're going to value all these things. They all have a place, and I agree with that. But what's important then is how you relate them to each other and how you rate them to each other and how you incorporate them to make larger metrics, right? So, because without that, it just becomes subjective. It becomes, oh, well, these schools performed higher in these metrics, and these schools performed higher in these metrics, and these schools were here. Let's all talk about it as a group and make a decision, right? But to keep that quantitative nature, to keep that data-driven directive, you got to have a logic, right? So how do you group those 16 variables into 3 categories, 4 categories? How do you rank them? How do you throw out variables? And the 16 for 27 is water under the bridge at this point. But now we have 5 for 7. That's probably mathematically still too many variables for that sample size, right? So could you explain to us what the relative hierarchy of those metrics are, or how you're going to blend them together? Or is it only going to be, are we going to lose that quantitative nature for the sake of just talking about it? Does that make sense? Like, how do we take the quantitative inputs and logically weight them to make a decision, or is that just individuals making that decision?
So a couple things pop into my mind as you're talking about it. Number one, this is the kind of community input that's valuable for us to consider, for board members who are here to be able to share with fellow board members as well, and for us as district leaders to have those conversations. There was a memo, and it's in It's in the, under one of either data tab or the other one, the timeline tab. There's a memo that describes the 16 grouped into 5 areas and which of those 16 are primary consideration moving forward versus which ones are like, we're not going to consider these right now. So I encourage you to look at that memo that I sent to the board. That will have some of that definition for you. And then the other piece that is going to be is just let's collect all the data that we can so that we can have more meaty substantive talks. Much as, again, we got to remember, Boundary Options Committee wasn't there to say what schools close and what schools are open. It said, who do we study more?
Right.
And so that would be the direction that I see us moving forward as a district with leadership across the district, depending on who has some expertise in that area, but also listening to everybody and also the community input.
Okay, and then just one more question, because I saw the variable of building age. Buildings cost money, but one of the supposed to be perks of government is that it's supposed to have a long view. Government is supposed to work, at decades to multi-decade timeframes to make those hard decisions, right? And it seems like building age might just be playing into sunken cost fallacy, right? We rebuilt some buildings, we have new buildings. Maybe we didn't rebuild the buildings we should have, but we have them, so we're gonna now make decisions based on that decision that maybe wasn't the best. So if we're just thinking about long-term for Salt Lake City, why does building age right now matter? Shouldn't we be able to muster the resources to have a longer-term fiduciary responsibility to the community?
I think that's a great consideration for us to hear, so thank you.
Yeah.
I too am caught up on building age, especially with how much capital expenditures have gone through and how much per school and per student we've all gotten. And it's really disheartening to see that 8 of the 9 schools that have been rebuilt have been east of 1,300. There has been no investment, as you've said. There is 5 of the 7 schools are the oldest schools in the district. And there's been no investment. And then I see your school closure. Well, the investment has happened, but at the same level as if you look at per year costs, some of those are the same or less or more than what Wasatch is, for example, which is an old school. Then I look at your board, your slides here, and it says 1979 Ensign closed. What year was it rebuilt?
I believe right around that same time.
Yeah, about 1979. So it seems disingenuous when you start listing oh, we closed 32 schools, but we also rebuilt schools at the same time. And the next thing I
would like
tell
to real quickly just respond to that by saying, when you close a school a mile away from where it was, that has a very real effect on the people who lived across the street, 1 block away, 2 blocks away.
we know we just faced Lowell in the last round.
Right,
And
so
now you're
so
doing
that's
this
another
again.
example of, yeah, that closure was a real closure. Now, was another school with the same name built about a mile away? Yeah, but it did have an impact on that community, and we know that, just as any school closure would.
I will give it, it definitely had an impact on the community. I'm saying it's disingenuous to say, oh, this is how we solved the problem last time, and not mention that we were also building brand new schools. For example, Wasatch is a prime area for a community learning center. It was never given as an option. Why? I mean, it's just, it's beyond me. And it's also beyond, if you look at just the numbers of how much money has been spent per student on each building. Wasatch is running at a very minimum rate. We serve 30 to 40% free and reduced lunch kids, and yet we aren't a Title I school, and we're operating at the same costs as Uinta, Bonneville, those kind of things, including capital expenditures. And we have an old school. Imagine what we could do with a new school. And then the other thing is, I just don't understand why you keep punishing us for not investing in the Central City. I mean, you came to our school and said, oh, we have these quadrants, everyone's going to be there, we're going to look at feeder patterns. Yet 3 of the 7 schools feed right here into Bryant, the most diverse school in the district. You have the other ones all feed, not one, you have one that kind of goes to Clayton, not one school at the end of the day feeds into Highland. And that I mentioned just for location alone. If this is a valley and a city problem, I don't understand why the central city has to take the brunt of it. And I wish that you could really consider that.
Thank you for sharing that. I would like to say that Hawthorne, those neighborhood students, I believe, do feed into Hillside, but boundaries are based on where residents are, not just elementary boundaries. But thank you for sharing.
Hi, Brian. I'm a parent of 2 students at Wasatch and a graduate in 2023. And the G5 policy states that demographic factors like race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status of the current school population will be considered in the school closure process. But in the consideration spreadsheet, there is no data, only mention of using those factors to adjust boundaries. Wasatch is a shining example of successful integration, racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically in the district. And I think we should be given credit for this inclusive approach. Why wasn't this factor considered as the policy promised it would be in determining which schools were added to the closure list?
Thank you for the question. I think one of the best resources to take a look at might be the memo that came out at the September 5th board meeting that did have it as a consideration. Gosh, I need my glasses. I'm getting old, sorry. So we did have listed under considerations not in primary use for school closure decision making, school closure recommendations. Considerations not in primary use, school feeder patterns, federal, state, or court mandates, school designations related to state designated categories of performance, student educational opportunities and performance, and demographics. The district has chosen not to use current school measures of race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status as a primary consideration in school closure decision-making. Demographic information related to residential patterns and enrollment are measured as described in the consideration above. So while we do think that knowing our schools well, knowing our demographics well, knowing what that looks like needs to be something that all schools have an innate knowledge of, we do think that with boundary changes, pieces like that, we're going to see some changes, and that's where that piece plays into it. We don't have it as a primary consideration. That doesn't mean it wasn't considered. And so we can't, there are some pieces that are going on in our school that unless we draw some incredibly funky boundaries, we're not going to have a school that has what our district represents, which is a global majority district. We're not going to have 55, 60% of our students be students of color in every one of our elementaries. There's some limitations to what we can do there based on how our city is, where people live and how it's been. That could be a 2-hour discussion right there about why we are where we are as a city, and I won't get into that piece of it. But I do encourage you to take a look at where demographics falls under, and though it wasn't a primary consideration, it still is a consideration.
Okay, I think that just a quick follow-up, equity is in the tagline of the district. It's a majority-minority district. Integration is what this district is about. We're a progressive city. And I'm very disappointed that it's not a primary consideration, because if you look at what's happening on the East Bench, or really what's not happening, that's what's on everybody's mind in this room.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I have a question at a sort of a higher level of generality. You presented the selection of the number of schools for further study as a matter of sort of ideal elementary school size of 3 3 general classes at each grade level. But I'm wondering, to what extent is this process also driven by financial considerations and, pressure to not have so many school buildings? If the district had significant new sources of revenue, such as possibly selling off certain pieces of property from schools that appear to me to have larger campuses than they really need, and would you consider retaining some smaller schools than having 3 classes for every grade?
Thank you for the question. I think we're not going to get exactly with 3 teachers. There's going to be a little variance there. What we see right now is schools in our district everywhere from 170 students up to 560, and everything in between there. Our average school size is right around 325, 330. This is last year's numbers. Not sure what we're going to look like this year, about 325, 330. When you start looking at that, if selling land, we also know that to operate a typical school, non-Title I in a typical year, I don't have the number off. I want to say it's right around, like with all the costs that go into it, I want to say it's right around $3 to $4 million a year. Even selling a piece of property for 15, 20 million, and I don't know, will it run a school for a handful of years? Yeah, but that runs out. We also know this, when we sell property, if you ever do, if all of a sudden it's like, hey, people in Salt Lake City are starting to live more like some of the big metro, they are having small children in 2-bedroom apartments. That density really is affecting small children in that way. There might be a time in the future that you have to say, we need to open a school back up in this area. Once you've sold a property, you are never getting it back. The only way you're opening a school is to be on the 4th and 5th and 6th floors of a high-rise building somewhere, because that land's long gone. So I think that's part of the reluctance of, I can't speak for past school board members, though I have heard that talked about by not this current school board, but in the past I've heard that talked about, that whole, we got to hang on to the land. Not everybody maybe believes that, but it is one of the factors in there. And the other piece is we're trying to make that 170 to 560, 570 range, bring it in a little bit so that we have a little more in that. Yeah, there are probably going to be some schools that are still smaller than others, but we got to get the range a whole lot smaller.
Brian, I'm going to add something quickly. So the financial aspect is important, but I do also want to bring us back to the academic portion as well. This isn't just an exercise in financial stewardship, which is important, but we're looking for academic outcomes for students. And looking at research and these ideal models for schools, it tells us that by right-sizing our schools, we'll be better able to provide those opportunities so kids in all parts of the city have access to academic programs like we're seeing in some of our schools.
Wait, are you saying some of these schools are underperforming?
No, not at all.
So then that statement is completely wrong.
Let me clarify what I meant by that. For example, at some of our schools, we don't have that ideal 3 classrooms for every grade level. In some of our schools on the study list, we've only got one classroom per grade level. That means we have fewer options for students. There's fewer opportunities for teachers to collaborate. There are also fewer options if a student needs to change classrooms. There's literally nowhere else to go in that school. And those are just some of the things that go into play. It's not about the academic performance, it's about the offerings that we can provide in a school that has the ideal size, or as close as we can get to that. I just wanted to make sure that I'm stressing that the academic piece is important, not just the financial. Thank you.
In connection with that, could I just ask what figure you all use as an ideal size for a K through 3 classroom? Number of students in an individual classroom.
Our funding for K-3 is right around 24 students per classroom, but there are things like land trust funds, sometimes schools use money to bring that down, or our teacher student success, TSSA funds. So there are different funds that schools get that sometimes say, hey, we got enough money to buy or to pay for one more teacher, so that those 2 big second grade classes, let's have 3 second grade classes that are a little bit smaller. But that varies school to school.
Right. I volunteer in one of the classes on the study list, and the class sizes have been large.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions and comments tonight. I'm a parent of a kindergarten and second grader at Wasatch, and I have 2 questions regarding the process so far, especially for this further study phase. I'm concerned overall that the process is great. Like Jimmy was talking about 16 metrics, much data, and for such an important, for many of us, personal decision, I'm just concerned that there's not enough internal capacity, or have you scoped the amount of internal capacity, both in time and expertise, as well as staffing, for this process, specifically the further study process? And if you have, how much time and resources are you anticipating? And if you do not have enough internal capacity, have you requested or asked for external capacity, like consultants or something like that?
So thank you for the question. So far, we have not asked for consultants. We're just beginning the further study piece. Consultants outside of our district. I do think that if you look at the administrative procedures of G5, it speaks toward the district. There's a lot of references from this September point moving forward about the district. And so the district there is a lot of expertise within our district of people that really do know our schools well. I think that what we're hearing from parents is not only some of the practical side of what they know about schools, but also the emotional piece, that attachment. We have people in auxiliary services in different capacity that can look at it also from a very objective point of view. The things that are struggles within it's like, man, that thing right there causes a huge problem. We got to solve that huge problem. So then it comes down to that discussion. It ties in some with finance, but I do agree with Yandri that that's not a primary consideration, but it is a consideration. So the people that we've been using are not just within our school district, but also within our city planners, liaison to the mayor, city transportation people, crossing guard, city crossing guard. They're the ones who do the crossing. Our city sets that up. That isn't school-based except for maybe a student out in front of the school stopping some students on a close-by crosswalk. But so that's happening. We are involving the city more than I think we have in the past. I shouldn't say for sure because I'm new at this position, but feels like those are pieces that we're tying in as well. So with those pieces and working with superintendent and directors and administrators and people who as we go out and look at schools and we hear these kind of comments, this is all part of the consideration that'll help us.
Okay. And my second question relating to the process, especially for the further study, was at the end of the further study period, are you anticipating that you will present alternatives analysis to the board to look at various alternatives, or are you planning to make one recommendation that the board has to either say yes or no to? I'm concerned because I think an alternatives analysis type approach would give the board more information to respond to. It would give the public more information to respond to because at this point there's not a lot of those alternatives aren't presented to us, I guess.
I think the data is going to lead us to that answer. I don't know it right now. So that's a good question and we'll make note of that. But I think that's what September and October are for is. So thank you for that consideration, and we'll take that in.
On one of the slides about boundary changes, it talked about wanting kids to have walkable alternatives, and I was just wondering, can you tell me what that means? Like, is that just a distance, or are there other factors? What is a walkable alternative?
So that's part of those meetings with city crossing guard people, city planners. I've been going and walking some of it. I mean, it's myself, it's others. It's okay. Hey, if I live here, I'm crossing 4 lanes of traffic versus here I'm crossing one going one way, one going the other. And is there a crossing guard or not? It's geographic features play into that some too. Distance. We've been looking at, okay, what does a 1 mile radius around each school look like if we have these schools. And then there are, I don't know if it's a state or federal law. I think it's a federal law of if a student lives more than 1.5 miles at the elementary level, not at the secondary, but at the elementary level, if they live more than 1.5 miles away, doorstep to school property, then transportation must be provided. And what would that look like if we needed to? We're kind of looking at a little bit smaller circle. We don't want to go 1.5 miles. We know for a second grader that looks a lot different than it does for a 6th grader, for example. So yes, those are being considered as well. And yeah, those different pieces. Thank you.
I have a multi-phased question, but to start, I have a student at Emerson, and I have future students at Wasatch, or I guess maybe Ensign, or depending on what decisions you make. It seems like one of the major considerations for your study is the age of the building. If you're considering age of the building, then you're targeting schools in the middle of the city because they were built first. If you close some of the schools on your list, if you closed Benyon and Wasatch, if you closed Hawthorne and Emerson, you're getting rid of all of the schools in the middle of the city. So are we to assume that it's an either-or situation, or is there actually a situation where you close all of those schools?
The recommendations that come out of this group will be based on those considerations we looked at. Of course, we'll look at what our data points us to, but all we can do is make that recommendation, whatever that might be, based on those factors right there. We are not at a point, I don't feel like I'm at a point, I don't want to speak for other people, our superintendent, anyone, of saying that there's going to be either ors. There could be either ors, but there might not be. It might be, what does it look like if this is what we do and this is if this is the recommendation we make? It might be, nope, we can't do that because here are some insurmountable things that are going to just throw a kink in it. We got to look at it with this many schools instead. So we're not at the point right now, I think, in data collection to be able to safely say what that's going to look like.
Okay, I can respect the fact that you don't want to make statements about either ors or things like that at this point. I think it's insane to imagine that you would close all 4 of those schools, personally.
Thank you for your comment.
Assuming you close even 1 or 2 of those schools, you'll also be closing schools where there are special programs. What are your intentions for choosing where those special programs go? And, the ELP, the hubs, et cetera. And when will you be making those recommendations? Because those obviously affect a major portion of your students. And it doesn't seem like they're being looked at holistically like your schools are.
So, of course, we have people that have more expertise in, for example, teaching and learning, in special education, in some other areas that I'm going to try to do my best to play that facilitator to bring that out, but those kind of recommendations would be part of the recommendation when it comes in late November, early December. That's our time frame of those recommendations.
So along with your recommendations for which schools would actually be closed, you anticipate also making recommendations for where those programs would go?
Yeah.
And if a school stayed open but you needed to move a special program because you needed to make room for more students, would those recommendations be made at the same time?
Yeah, so like, okay, hey, we've got different boundaries now for this school, and we want.
Well,
them-
Emerson, for example, has the ELP and the hub. They're already right-sized. They can't fit very many more students. So assuming you kept Emerson open and you needed to make room for more students, I would assume that one of the options would be to move a special program.
Yeah, I think we did speak to that. Can't remember if it was in the memo or up on one of the slides. Huh?
Not to that question directly.
No, not Emerson directly, but programs we spoke to. Let me take a look back here and see. We did speak to programs.
You did very briefly. I guess my question would be, are those recommendations going to be made at the same time? Can we expect to know what's going on at that same time?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, I'm here. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
I also wanted to say thank you for this forum and having the opportunity to ask these questions, because a lot of us have been sitting for what feels like almost already a long year with not a lot of information. I appreciate all the comments and questions asked. One of the things that before any of the other questions happen is, why don't we know what the qualifications are of the special committee and who comprises it? So for this to be a valid study, there has to be people that are qualified to make those recommendations. And I attended the meeting, what was it, a week or two ago, when one of the board members had asked you that question, and the question wasn't answered. So I feel that that's a really important thing to start all of this conversation with is, why don't we know? And it's okay, same thing he said, I'm not looking for names, but I, as a parent of a student who's here, I want to feel good. I'm open to the data and the logic behind it. It's not that I'm anti the change. I totally appreciate that we have a conundrum, but I want to feel really good about what happens next.
Thank you for your comment. This is at least my, and yeah, I believe it's our, other than what Salt Lake Virtual Elementary played a part in policy G5 and the administrative procedures that go with it. As we work our way through it, there's certainly growth and learning for us as well. This isn't meant to speak in a disparaging way in any way, shape, or form toward our interim superintendent, but the policy was the administrative procedures are very clear that the superintendent appoints the Boundary Options Committee. Now, I do think, and I know because I've worked with the people on it, I know that on that committee we had people that have been classroom teachers for a number of years, have been building administrators for a number of years, more than half of them. We have a few that have never been a teacher or an administrator, but they know busing better than anyone else that we know of in our district, which is why I think the superintendent appointed that, things like that. So while I have confidence in the group that I worked with, when it's why were they, I think one piece that we can certainly take from your comment.
It's less why and just know who, appreciate that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just, I'm not even curious. I totally appreciate that, and I had read that as well. But there still should be transparency. Again, no naming names, but I'd like to know how many. Are there 10? Are there 8?
13.
Are there 5? Thank you. And I had heard that number. But it's like, I feel that when we're putting this up on the website, there should say there's 13 committee members and here's their general expertise among us. And that hasn't been on there, and I'm requesting it now. And I feel that we are owed that.
Okay, we'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
And then a follow-up to that is, aside from the qualifications, one of the other things I feel like hasn't been very transparent at all is, I know you can go online and see what the budget is for the 23-24 year, et cetera, but we talk about the decrease and the trend of lower enrollment. That's important. are we in a deficit? Because I think if we hold there, I think everyone here has said, I know I'm from Wasatch, I feel my daughter has a very full class size, the school is great, all of that. Just because we have a decrease in enrollment doesn't also mean that we're at a deficit. And if there is, I would love to know that so I feel better about the decision to close, but I also don't know that number. Are we in a deficit every year? Are we going to be in a deficit? All we're looking at is low enrollment, but that doesn't necessarily equate to the dollars.
Thank you. We have projections. We think our projections are going to be pretty accurate, barring another, well, who knows what, another COVID run or something like catastrophic like that could always alter. But we do think that over the next about 5 to 10 years, we're going to keep losing some students, but at a much slower rate than we are now. We're looking at district-wide instead of, we're talking more along the lines of eventually getting down somewhere around 17,000, like low 17,000s. For our number is where we think bottom's gonna be. We're around, we're in the 19,000s right now. So a couple thousand more over the next 10 years says an average of a couple hundred a year. Now that's K-12. And then what we haven't figured in there is, whereas we look at our new strategic plan with pre-K, what does pre-K numbers do? What does that look like in schools as those build? Because pre-K 15 years ago in our district looks a whole lot different than pre-K now, which is a whole lot more robust. And how does that continue? So
I appreciate that. And the last thing I'll say is if my other request, if it's possible, is just to put up, here's the budget. Are we in a financial deficit by keeping all these schools open and what the projections are from a financial standpoint?
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
So I might be young, but I do know that 7 schools are closing. And I do know that like you said before, you are looking to where the affordable housing is going up and where like 3-bedroom, 3 condos and stuff are. But why would Wasatch, which is downtown and had just a new apartment just put up and then more apartments coming, and then close that school but keep Ensign open, which is an Upper Avenue school, who those kids, those houses are much more expensive. Well, it's still expensive wherever you go in Salt Lake, but the avenues are extra expensive. So why would you close down a school which also has great transit? You guys are so worried about bus drivers. Kids are getting to school late, they're missing class periods. Yes, because you can't find bus drivers. Ensign, sure, it looks like it has the F11 bus. That bus got closed down. It has the 209, which takes you up right in front of the library. That's the closest that you'll get with the city buses. Wasatch, on the other hand, has the one bus. You can take the 209 down and then hop on the one bus to get to Wasatch from the upper avenues, and then it has the 223. Wasatch has more public transportation, in my opinion, than Ensign does. And you close down Benyon, which has 100 kids, and that school is meant to hold 600. Those kids, whose parents most likely work downtown or at the hospital, and you'll either have to bus them in or they'll have to drive up to Ensign or wherever you're going to send them, it's going to be much harder for their parents to get them to school when you're having them drive up a hill or walk up a hill. And when you could go to Wasatch and they could take the city bus or something, or their parents could drop them off on the way to work. It could work so much easier if you kept the main schools open instead of the schools in the middle of a neighborhood. Wasatch still is in the middle of a neighborhood, it's just on a public road. So it's easier to get to and from school.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your information and your perspective on that. The only piece I would push back against is we don't know 7 schools are going to close. We do know 7 schools are further study. We don't know yet how many will close It could be 0, it could be 7, it could be somewhere in between, but thank you for sharing.
I think the accessibility question should be addressed though, because Ensign is not accessible. And while you haven't labeled those avenues as major roads, walking up the avenues is not safe or accessible for children.
Sorry, sir, go ahead.
Thank you, Brian, and Dr. Grant, thank you for letting us speak. My question was about mainly the sample size used for the population in this study for each school. Was it only using the 2022 school year? And if it was, why wasn't the decline in enrollment over the past 10 years or the decline in enrollment going forward used? The two schools with the lowest decline are Wasatch and Emerson over the next 10 years. And over the past 10 years, Emerson was the second lowest, and I know Wasatch was really low on that list as well when it comes to decline in enrollment. So was the sample size for the BOC, did it look at prior enrollment and going forward as well, or just currently 2022?
Thank you for that question. So we looked at data, and the declining enrollment overall has obviously, when you see the whole district and what's dropped off over the last few years has been, that was the district-wide. When we looked at declining enrollment for our elementary schools, all 27, it was 3,800 students over an 8-year period. So there was decline there. We know we do have projections. They do play a part in this. Projections aren't any guarantee, but we do think those projections have been pretty close for the most part. We also have things that we're looking at, like a 3-year cohort survival rate for each grade. And I hate to call it a survival rate, that sound, I mean, it's just the technical term for it. They're all, yeah. Anyway, so we look at those as well too, because what we're starting to see as we pull data is the 3-year rate at one grade level might look totally different than the 3-year rate at a grade level 3 years later or 4 years later. So some of that plays into it. But no, it wasn't just based on where our population is right at this moment, but we do know overall when we look at, and I don't have a slide up of it, of our applied economics, we are looking overall, whether it's a lot or a little from any school, we're still looking at some drops over the next 5-6 years of number of students at pretty much every school. Even if it's a few, even if it's 4 or 5%, we're not getting any bigger right now. And so that'll be part of it.
Yeah, and I hope that the BOC has taken into consideration the rate that how low Wasatch is probably going to grow in Emerson over the next 5 years. And we're all dropping, but hopefully the sample size is big enough that it's considering going forward as well. And I'm glad the sunk cost fallacy was brought up, because the newer schools, I think Meadowlark's the newest, has the highest decline going forward, which was the newest school built. So
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and another question. Did the BOC take into consideration, this has kind of been brought up, if Wasatch and Benyon and Emerson and these schools all close, I figure the kids are going to go to a nearby school like Uinta or Ensign. Was it practically envisioned how these children are going to climb up the East Bench Fault to Uinta or trek up in the winter to Ensign from First Ave all the way to 13th Ave?
So the whole purpose was further study. We didn't want to come in and say, we know all the answers, this is what it is, and we know it in August, and look, we're done, forget about anything else. It's considerations like what you're bringing up right now that go into that further study. It's really getting into the nitty-gritty of it, and it's taking those kind of things into consideration. So
yeah, consider that feedback, like if Emerson closed, that East Fault is not, it's pretty steep, and the same with if Wasatch closed, going up to Ensign is kind of laughable to think, but yeah.
All right, thank you. What? I used to live on 10th Ave. I remember that one. And I've lived on, down on 2nd Ave too, so, yep.
Hey, Brian, I'm a Wasatch parent and now a West ELP parent as well. I'm going to touch on some of these points. You all have said that closures could be ongoing every 5 years, every 10 years, right? This could keep going. So I think one of the questions a lot of us still have is, are the right schools on this list? We've talked about, you and I have talked about multiple examples of inaccurate or inconsistent information that were used to create these lists, and that still troubles us. But beyond that, there's very real data. There are schools that have incredibly low neighborhood population. The best example of that I can think of is Washington Elementary, which I'm sure you know, looking at the data from last October, had 91 resident children at that school. That's extremely low. And so we hope that as you're moving forward, you're considering, you keep talking about the importance of neighborhood population. If there are schools, and I understand that's a new building that there's been money put into, but if community is important, then a school with such a low neighborhood population, I hope that's part of the ongoing conversation. Wasatch, as we keep talking about, we're not only a strong neighborhood school, but we have brought in hundreds and hundreds of children to our school outside the district, outside our boundaries over decades. Something we've been talking about at Wasatch is if the school district is a business, which I think you all are, if you're a business and you had a franchise that year after year was unexpectedly bringing in these customers from huge distances, customers who stayed, in some cases, generations, the reputation, the academics, the strong community, the strong diversity, I would just take a very hard look at that business and think, is this the business to close right now? Such a well-integrated, diverse school. We are the most diverse economically and ethnically in the northeast section of the school district. We hope you take a really, really hard look at that. We are an asset to this district. And we want to respond to some of the things in this PowerPoint. I feel like I could make my own PowerPoint and respond to you. When and what is the best way? I could go on, I won't, but how can I, line by line, there's certain things, including major safety improvements to South Temple, ADA, the fact that we have 2 playgrounds that no one seems to talk about. We really want to address some of the concerns. How is the best way for us to get you that information?
Certainly I encourage anyone to put comments, concerns through the website.
I know, we're concerned no one's reading them, I hate to tell you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one possible.
Okay.
And also your concerns are just even being able to share now, share that information.
Can I go really quick and just go down a few of these?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. South Temple, a busy corridor, that's how you guys describe us. Is the district aware of 2 major changes over the last year and a half? Our road, South Temple, was restriped and reduced to 2 lanes, dramatically slowing down traffic. The Wasatch SEC spent years partnering with the city to install a new crosswalk with a flashing light that was recently put in on South Temple and R, which many families are using. And of course, other families use the tunnel, which is open before school, after school, frankly, often into the evening, and it makes that road far safer than it would appear on the surface. I hope we aren't closing schools based on the availability of parking. As that young woman just said, there's major accessibility for Wasatch on bus lines. We have not only my own children taking the public bus, and thank you for the passes. They're amazing. I mean, that has made a major impact on my family. But faculty take the bus, faculty walk, and additionally, you could add on-street parking at Wasatch on the north side of that street. I've actually already emailed the city to talk about that process, because I would love to know, how do you do that? And proximity to another nearby elementary school. Every single one of those, I think, you mentioned had proximity to another nearby elementary school. You did not say that about Wasatch. And because I've done the math, We are the furthest from any other elementary school that is not on the closure list. We're 1.4 miles away from the nearest school, and to get there, students, we've all talked about that's the fault, we'd have to walk up 350 feet of elevation gain. So I feel like, and I think many of us feel that by closing Wasatch, the district would be making it harder for these kids to access their education. This is making their education less equitable. They wouldn't be in the busing range, and so we have an invitation for the superintendent and all the school board members, and I'm actually smiling, but I'm really serious. We would like to all meet at Wasatch, including you, Brian. You could bring your bike, and we want to walk or bike or scoot all the way to Ensign to demonstrate what that would be like. And I'm not joking. I mean, I'm just not. I just think it would put a tremendous burden on working families that don't have a car, or maybe only have one car, or, it puts a larger burden on those families who don't have the ability to get up that hill. I think those may be all my points. I just want you to know we just celebrated diversity, and please keep Wasatch open, and I'll keep communicating with you.
Thank you for sharing. I will go not out on a limb at all and say, though it does make a good sound bite, it's not anywhere near the truth that any school's going to be recommended because of parking alone. It'd be a recommended. Parking alone will not be a reason, but there are a lot of different factors on the list. I appreciate you sharing some of your not only perspective but concerns there as well, and information that you had, so thank you.
Hi, Brian. First, I want to join my fellow commenters in thanking you for being here. Thank you to Dr. Grant. Thank you to our school board members who are here. I didn't want to come tonight. I bet you didn't either. So thank you for being here. If you'll indulge me, I have 2 comments and a question. It's like 2 truths and a lie. The first one is I want to echo the comment that we heard earlier tonight about presenting options to our school board instead of just a yes-no set of schools to close. One of the things that we've heard a lot about in this process is transparency, and our school board members are elected and they are accountable to us, to the community, in a way that is different from how you are accountable, you and your team are accountable to us. And so if you present options to the school board, that makes me feel like our feedback is going to be incorporated in a more meaningful way. So, for your consideration. The second thing is, we've heard a lot about the age of the building, and I think that is a really reasonable consideration when you're making a tough decision like closing schools. I am concerned about scaling that decision to up to 25% of our elementary schools. We are where we are. Would I have done it differently? I'd like to think so, but I'm not in your shoes. But going forward, thinking about some of these other factors, that community input and community impact, and I know you mentioned that things like student achievement and demographics are not areas that you're focusing, but as it comes up, gosh, that's sure important to us. So I would love to hear more about that safe transportation, community impact, and how student achievement are going to be affected with your recommendations going forward. Question. This process, although a long time in coming, was sort of jump-started by a state audit that recommended 5 sets of recommendations, right? One of them, tax increment financing. Another one was like how you manage your nutrition budget. Another one was closing schools to right-size the schools. And another one, which is key here, is replicating your best schools in the district. And so, I don't even have to finish. They know where I'm going. And so I guess my question, and you're on the closure committee, so maybe this is more of a question for Dr. Grant or somebody else in the district, but how do you respond to a concern that we're focusing on one part of that audit, but there's another key piece about replicating our best schools, for example, a nationally award-winning Blue Ribbon School, and taking those schools who are leaders in your district and replicating that throughout instead of closing them?
Okay, so thank you for the comments and question. I want to start with that that piece that is, that I think, first of all, I think the piece that's really kind of tricky in having these conversations is to try to get to the point where people really see this as further study and not closure. I do think that that was what Boundary Options Committee put there. These are schools we want to study further. Maybe they all work, maybe they don't all work. Maybe some work, maybe some don't. You know, that piece of it right there. So I think that that's an important way that part plays out. And while I appreciate your comments on that, we do think too that replicating success has been what we have attempted to do to varying degrees of success. We see some very successful pockets here and there, and for different reasons. And there's a long list of why I personally would think some of those reasons we do have come about. It's really hard to build that piece of replicating, because when you try to put that in another school, when you try to just say, here's our philosophy, here's what we did, now you go do it, that part typically is more of a struggle. It can work, I'm not saying it can't, but it's typically more of a struggle than saying, here are the people that have done it, they're going to be part of that, they're going to be part of that critical mass that can do it. When you start a school, having done this, at Northwest Middle School for the time I was there, we were out of almost 140 middle schools, we were number 129 out of 140, just looking at student growth and achievement. 4 years later, we were number 31 out of 140. Part of that was getting the critical mass, the right people in that building. We think that the people in the building can make that difference. And I'm using, I know, a middle school example from 10 years ago versus now, not the exact same thing, but we do think that there are incredible, versatile, flexible, wonderful teachers at all 7 of these schools, whether 2 close, 5 close, none, I mean, whatever the case might be. We think the talent can travel if we nurture it correctly. So we don't think it's only about the building, but there's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of layers to say, yeah, we know it's partly about the building. We also know it's partly about the people and the community that you build around that with parents. And of course, front and center through it all is students.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, can I add one thing? Sorry, just quickly. There was part of the question that referenced the legislative audit. I wanted to point out that we actually have been looking at this before that audit came out. That audit came out in December of 2022, and this particular boundary study process began in the summer of 2022. So we were aware, Brian referenced earlier that it's been a couple of decades since the district has closed schools. We were aware of that need, and the legislative audit just kind of echoed the need that was already there. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. It's much appreciated. I am a dad of a Wasatch kindergartner. We have 2 other kids who hopefully will also go to the school as they get older. We moved to the neighborhood about 5 years ago, in no small part because of the schools, because we were close enough that our kids could walk or bike when they get older. We're still trying to get to that point now with the kindergartner, but that's the goal, at least. And, I was thinking about this in context of something else you said about the need for housing, diverse housing, housing for families. You said several questions ago, maybe someday sort of preferences will change and families will start living in 2-bedroom apartments. And I think if we close the schools and create a school desert, that's definitely not going to happen. And even families like my own, we're not going to choose to live in a place where there's no schools. This is going to accelerate the decline of the district because no families are going to want to live in a place where there's nowhere to send their kids to school. I guess that's a comment. I had also sort of a comment question about mobility. I know everyone's kind of talking about hiking up to 11th Avenue for Ensign or 12. I guess the lower part, you still have to go up to 12th, right? And I mean, I jog up that and it just kills me. Like, my kids cannot do it. Realistically, everyone will drive or maybe take the bus. And I guess I'm really concerned at a time where like childhood obesity is reaching epidemic levels, where kids have a hard time with their schedules getting activity in. What is the plan here? Because even if we bus everybody, we're reducing the number of kids who have access to active transportation. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so I guess I'm curious if you guys have any response or any plan for that, any way to deal with the fact that even on buses, fewer kids are going to be walking and biking and doing things that keep them healthy.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing that consideration as well. So we'll also take that into part of our discussions and talks. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Mike Ownby. I have two kids at Wasatch. One who was at Wasatch. I went to Lowell. I was at Bryant. I was in the Glee Club on the stage. But so I'm attached.
Would you like to come back up?
No, I think
for no, sorry, go ahead.
I think we did Beauty and the Beast. It was great. But I'm attached to the public school system here, and and this is a comment. I feel that the public school system in Utah is very much under threat, and I am disheartened to hear about the possibility of school closures, and I worry that some of this may be a self-fulfilling prophecy, that we've had kids leave the public school system for charter schools, for private schools. Some of that might have been due to COVID, but I think that school closures don't provide a lot of confidence for parents when they look and make those decisions. That's my comment part. My question is, you guys, and I do want to say, I do not envy your job. Jimmy made a great point about the data and the relative weighting of each of these factors. You have a category that is cost effectiveness. Now, the only reason we're on this list is because there was a numerical value assigned to this, and the number was a conglomerate of 4 different factors. Is that all accurate so far?
That was one of the many times that we went through. I just gave, when there was a request for it, I just gave one of our working draft. We did different ways, different things. I probably should have cut that off because there were 4 or 5 different ways of looking, and that was one of the 4 or 5 ways that did get published. I understand that piece of it, but on our committee, we were trying to divvy up and look at how it comes down to, when you have all the data that you have in front of you, to say, who should we further study? Not who should we close, who should we further study? You have questions. You have questions in your head with it, and then as you try to do that, you do as a team of 13 start to make some judgment calls after a lot of debate back and forth of, no way, that school you shouldn't have ranked that school that high there. It should have been like, there's no way that's one of the 10 lowest maintenance schools. Here's why. Blah blah blah. And we learn from each other, and that's where yes, that was on the working, and it says at the top, working draft considerations, because that and column changed at least 4 or 5 times based on what discussion we were having that day.
Okay, but I guess I'm going on the data that is posted on the website right now.
Yeah,
okay. 4 categories, a number in each category. You take the average, right? And you take the bottom 7 schools on that.
I'm trying to recall which one was, I think it was the
cost effective.
It was
one category, I can tell you.
It was that, it was looking at the different considerations as they were lumped under reasonable, safe,
reasonable,
cost-effective,
simple, and cost-effective. Those are the 4 categories.
We put all 4 of them under those, yeah.
Okay, but you get a number for each of those categories. You add them up, you take the average, and these schools are the lowest on that, the average, correct? I mean, that's the I highlighted schools. Those are the ones
that was on that time through. Yep.
So when Wasatch is over 40 years old, Ensign is over 40 years old, both of these schools don't cost much per pupil. We got 7 points. Ensign got 12 points for that category. That data doesn't make any sense to me. You've got a school like Parkview.
I don't believe it was for that category. It was going all the way across with all 4 of them, right?
No, I'm looking at the spread data. We got 7 points for the cost effectiveness. All right, Ensign got 12, or I think they might have gotten 13 points. Parkview costs $16,000 per student, almost twice as much as both Ensign or Wasatch. Their school is 30 years old, 10-year difference, and you know, they're getting 12 points for this. I just don't.
No, well, so the 12, 13, 13, and 13 for Ensign, that was one team of 4 for all the categories going across, 12. Another team of 4, all the categories across, a 13. Another team of 4, all the way across, got a 13. Another one, a 13. So that's not just for the building piece where one's a 12 and one's a 7.
But
it's all the way across. 4 different teams scoring into that. We did that way. That we divided our team of 13.
So those
into
4 numbers
groups.
do not reflect each of those separate categories. That does not reflect that they got 13 points for their cost-effective category. Is that what you mean?
It is going all the way across, yes.
Okay.
The 12 points that you see for Ensign is looking at all of it all the way across.
So that was simply how the 4 teams looked at that differently, and they said this over these many categories, or the multiple criterion categories, that team said they assigned 13
So
points.
for that 12, and I don't have that number written down, again, it was a working piece, but it could have been under safe, it could have been a 3 or a 4. In the next column, it could have been a 4. The next one, for a total of 12 under the 4 so 3 plus 5 plus 4 plus 4 is
All right.
12.
That makes it a little more.
Or is 16. Sorry, that's 16. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. If they each one scored a 3, that'd be a 12 all the way across. That's what it was.
Then I guess it's even less transparent how each of these categories was weighted.
Again, it's a holistic look at it. It isn't about a score. This isn't a scorecard.
It's very much about a score. It is a scorecard. We're the lowest. The 7 schools are the lowest scoring. It's a scorecard.
But it isn't in the sense of how we decided who to recommend for further study.
Wait, so these schools aren't the lowest scored schools on that list?
I mean,
They are using that round right there. We looked at, as we went through and we did different ways of trying to look at schools, we kept coming up with the same 5 to 10, about 5 to 10 schools were consistently ones that had concerns that we said, we want to know more about them. We want to study them further. These schools keep coming up under these different ways we're looking at it. We want to study them further. We don't know enough about them. We think that there might be concerns there. We're going to find out in a further study.
Okay. I appreciate you trying to answer that. I'm not sure it's any more clear to me, but I do appreciate trying to answer that.
Thank you.
So I actually have had a question like this. Your scores, so first of all, it is not true that you're not basing your decision for further studies on scores, because you're picking all the schools that are below 10 and you're saying we're going to study these further. There's no dispute, these are the numbers. What I think is problematic is that we don't know how you came up with those scores. So for example, the building costs, why don't we have the spreadsheet that outlines the building costs for all of the schools? Do we have those?
I went ahead and put it all into Excel, and as a citizen I did, and I can tell you for a matter of fact, Wasatch, just because we're an old building doesn't mean we cost more.
Well, so what I would like to see is a spreadsheet that comes from you that tells us how much, what are the building costs, what are the maintenance costs, what are the costs for the administration, what sorts of savings are we going to be seeing from potential closure of these schools. It is also the fact that we're closing these schools because of the financial reasons. Because what you just said earlier is that none of these schools are underperforming, so why close something that works? There's no reason to close something that works, obviously. Before you tell me something about right-sizing the schools, I want to see the research that tells you that 25 students in elementary school classroom is the right size of a classroom. I want to see that research, and I would like you to publish that publicly so we can know why that is, where that number came from.
We are funded on state funding.
Listen,
No,
that's
hold on,
different.
please, let me finish.
Sure.
Please. So when we say this is how many if you go to any district, whether I was not born and raised in Utah when I came here and saw that there were 23, 24 in a second grade class, It took me a year, and I'm an educator, putting my own children into that system. I have stepchildren now in one of the 7 schools being further studied. I know what that's like as a parent to look at that as well as an educator. There's no magic about 25. We live in a state where we don't fund education the way we should fund education. Please let me finish. So, along with that we have that, we also know that when students, to say this is all about money is just not true. You can think that, but that doesn't make it true. And the reason it's not true is because when a second grader goes into a neighborhood classroom, and that is the only second grade they can go into, whether that class grows to 26, 27, 28, because there isn't a second or a third second grade classroom. We're doing a disservice to that student. We are not serving that student the way that student should be served. We think we can do it better. We think we can right-size our schools as much as people do or don't like that term. It's a condensed way of saying we have right now ways that we're trying to teach students that aren't as effective and efficient. And if you don't believe that, look at our data, and not just the data that says what our end-of-year score results are. Look at our reading pieces like that. Is this gonna fix everything? No. Is it gonna set a foundation where we can say, hey, you 3 second grade teachers, you actually have a chance to collaborate now. You have a chance to learn from each other. You have other classrooms just like yours you can go visit. Instead of, hey, second grade teacher, you're in this alone. I'm gonna check in on you, hope you're doing all right, but if you're not already a master teacher, good luck. And please don't go out ill. Please don't go out with any sort of illness or long-term something where we have to have a sub in there, because that's really going to sink the students in that one class, because we don't have another second grade teacher to draw expertise from to help out in that class. So those are all pieces that play into this as well.
So the additional data that we would like to see then is for every one of the schools, and I'm not talking about just the ones that you're studying for potential closure, what are the class sizes in each grade, and what are the test scores for all of those students in that school? I don't need you to...
Test scores are available on USB. That's all I was going to give you that information.
We would like the correlation between the class sizes, how many in each one of these schools, so that we know what's happening. One other question that I had was, we keep thanking school board members for being here. How many of them are actually here? 1 out of 7? 2 out of 7?
3.
Okay,
we had 2 others here earlier.
So
there were 4, I believe.
So I want to echo people's concerns that we are not actually heard by our school board members. We don't know if they're actually reading the comments that are being posted on the website. I know I've not always received responses to the emails to my school board members, and they do not have a great track record of working together. So it's not exactly inducing strong belief that they will work on this issue. And one other question, why don't expand the list of schools that are being studied? Why
Thank you for your
make it
comment.
bigger?
Yeah. Thank you for your comment.
Right, and one other thing, and I'll be done. I wonder about these numbers. Your ideal school has about 450 students. Even if these 7 schools had 450 students, which they don't, the number would come around 3,000, which is how many students you said you lost in the past several years. So it seems to me that you're not really telling us maybe 0 schools will be closed. I think maybe you're being a little bit disingenuous with your target closure numbers, if the numbers are what the issue is here.
Thank you for your comments.
Thanks for having this tonight. I would have preferred to yell out from the audience, but here I am.
Thank you. It just helps with the recording, so thank you.
I'm towards the end of the line, so a lot of this has been addressed, but I will say one of the things you really talked about as a reason was safe routes. And there are a number of little pods that all walk home from Wasatch. Our kindergartner last year walked with a group of about 7 from the school to H Street You know, they divert, they go up to Kachina, buy candy, maybe stop at Sev. Like, there's just like so many little pods, and it's just a special part of childhood, is being able to walk home and experience your neighborhood and your community, and look at the leaves and the trees, and sword fight with the little beans the bean seeds that grow, without adults. You know, it's just a time to be. When do our kids really get to be without adults out in the world? And walking home is part of that. And it means a ton that the kids can walk. And if we were to go up to Ensign, we would lose that. And so many kids in the lower Avs would lose that. Like Julia said, you try to walk from, someone said on a winter day, on a beautiful fall day, try to walk from and Second up to Ensign. It really can't be done unless you're an adult, and it's going to take you an hour plus to get up there. It's if you're little. So I don't know, just advocating for keeping the kids in a situation where they can walk and have the freedom.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your comments.
Hi, I'm Karen. Thank you for having us and having this forum. My two kids have graduated from Wasatch, so I'm a middle schooler parent, but I do care about this neighborhood. I used to be an out-of-district parent 20 years ago when they closed schools back in the day, and I chose to come to this area to bring my kid, but now I'm a neighborhood parent. And I am a data geek too. So I heard all these comments, I thought really good, but I kind of would like a little more transparency about how the data analysis was performed. Like, why did they not use demographics, and why did they not put that as a primary thing to put in their models or whatever they're going to do to analyze the data? Because is it going to protect the outer schools that aren't very diverse? I mean, I just think they should put consider all the key factors that actually impact children, and demographics and socioeconomic does impact children. So that, and then you say point to the data. Data's an art, so it's not really clear to me how it's been analyzed. You have things in text, things in writing, but there's so many ways we can cut it. Could they put a little more transparency about how it's done for people that are intelligent enough to know modeling and analytics? And I don't even know if the district even has an analytics team that does actually, because they used to, but then do they even have a statistician and epidemiologist on your team, or is it just people doing a bunch of spreadsheets and staring at data? I don't really, it's not really clear. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you for your comments. I think one thing that you said really does sum up the complexity of this, which is there's a lot of different ways to cut it. So somebody looking strictly at just numbers is going to miss the part that we're talking about right here. Somebody who just looks at what's being discussed right here and doesn't consider numbers at all is going to be missing out on a piece of it. So it is that holistic approach. There is no one right answer except we need to do something. That's the only right answer. We have schools as small as 170, 175 students. We do not serve those students as well as we could if we had schools that were a little bit bigger. We don't want monster-sized schools. We don't want kids falling out of classrooms because we don't have space. But we do think that we have a chance to be more systematic and systemic with how we address student learning, and we do know that when students learn, the vast majority of them feel better about school. They like school more. The safe and that whole social emotional learning piece of it for most students does go up when they have success at school and have some of those vibrant pieces that we see with those numbers. So do we have people that are looking at it analytically in our set? Yes, we do have people that are part of that, but that's not going to tell the full story.
Oh, yeah, I understand that. And I'm wondering why we can't just throw all the schools in the pot and just study it instead of narrowing it down. And that seems a little biased when you start to just select certain schools and leave the peripheral schools out, you know. Just throw them all in and just do a thorough analysis.
So certainly something to take for consideration on our administrative procedures, which do also mirror, it was, before I came on board, the work of board members, but also some of where state law plays into that about what needs to happen along the way. Not, don't want to get into which parts are, nope, this was just our board policy being our administrative procedures, which do call for that recommended list of schools to be studied further. That's where we are. That piece of it might be a piece that we have to revisit and look at, but we are partway through this, the administrative
No, I
procedures of
understand.
policy now.
Yeah, it was just a pattern that certain areas are protected, and it was protected 20 years ago, 20-ish years when we did this thing, that they weren't touched, and it was just these certain schools in the center that were touched. So I know, it's just the
Okay.
history.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comment.
I am also a parent. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, we'll take these comments from the last four of you standing here, and then just wanted to share that, so thank you. Go ahead.
I'm a parent at Wasatch as well. I've had 3 children either there or that have gone there. One of them is now here. We purposely have sent our daughter here because we believe in neighborhood schools. Our children have always walked to school, and we appreciate that. One of my concerns is that several years ago, I know Benyon was under consideration for closure, and the district decided that not to close it, partially because of the unique population around Benyon. I don't live in the Avenues, and I'm highly concerned that the divide will end up on economic lines down South Temple, and the kids in the Avenues will lose the diverse experience, and the kids not in the Avenues will go to a school that requires 16 different translators in order to have a school event with parents. And I love diversity. I love it. It's wonderful. But I'm concerned for our children. Our nation is already divided, largely along economic lines. And I don't want Salt Lake City to be part of that problem.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. And thanks to the school board members here too. I think I'm leaving this meeting more confused. And that's frustrating as a parent. I think in the summer meeting when these 7 schools, which you keep saying, for study, but they're for study foreclosure. Like that foreclosure part is important. When these were announced, I heard school board members say, this is a school district problem. I relate to the school district through my children's school. I don't walk in and say, my kid is a Salt Lake City school district child. I say they're a Wasatch student. And I heard school board members saying it's a district problem, and it's been said tonight, it looks like a lot of these at least the 4 schools, it's all Central City area. There could be school deserts, which is a huge problem. But I heard school board members say we need to kind of come together, find community. And this whole process for me as a parent has been incredibly disenfranchising. I've seen slides about no solar. Then I saw slides about some classrooms don't have windows. Then I see but we're not gonna look at demographics, we're not gonna look at school. It's very confusing, and we have smart people in this room. It shouldn't be that confusing. And I don't feel if Wasatch closes, I need to think about okay, how do I help my kids through that process? And
I don't feel any of that coming from the school district, from school board members, from this committee, from these meetings. It just feels like all of a sudden it's like all about the buildings and the building age. And it's incredibly frustrating. And I hope that there'll be more clarity in the future, and I hope people will choose how to communicate, and the communication will be better. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. My name's David Jones, and I am a member of the board of the East Liberty Park Community Organization. We're a recognized community organization with Salt Lake City. I really wanted to hear what all the parents and teachers had to say, so I kind of stepped to the back of the line. But I do have some comments for you that I'd like for you and the board members that are here present to take into consideration as you're going through your study. First of all, East Liberty Park gets involved with issues that are with the community. There's no community issue like schools. Emerson Elementary is in the heart of East Liberty Park. And to be very honest, no one in East Liberty Park wants the school closed. I can say, after sitting here and listening to all the articulate parents talk about the various issues, all I can say is wow. And I think you have enough information now that you can almost end your further study on a couple schools. I've got 5 things I want to talk about. One is the swath that would be barren of schools. You have a area that starts in the lower avenues, that's about a mile wide, that goes 3 miles down to 21st South and Sugar House. And if you closed all that schools, that would be unprecedented. You've got a slide here that talks about the history of school closures and how that somehow seems to be a normal thing when you do. Nothing on that slide ever shows about 4 schools in 1 year being closed in the central city. It would be tragic if that happened. And as a member of the community council, we would fight in every way possible to close that with the schools. Completeness, notice, transparency, and the big one for Emerson, it's a blue ribbon school. Completeness, and I think you're doing this. Any school closure requirements need to be done in conjunction with detailed plans for the new school boundaries and the impact on those new schools, because parents and students and teachers ought to have the right to know where their new school is going to be and how many students they expect in their classroom. Notice, once the district comes up with a recommendation, or I really like the idea of alternative analysis that someone had mentioned. I feel like the board doesn't need to act immediately. I think they need to give the public and the schools a good 60 days notice of like, here's what's being recommended to us. We have all this great input from our district and they have their expertise, but you've got a lot of expertise with parents and teachers that you need to hear from too, whatever they recommend or suggest. Transparency, that was a big deal at the last meeting. Everyone is in favor of transparency. There's nothing hidden here. And everyone wants transparency, but yet the district is refusing to disclose the decision makers on the Boundary Options Committee. And if the district can't be transparent about exactly who is making these decisions and who the superintendent put on the committee, it begs the question about then what else can the district not be transparent about? And you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you don't be completely transparent as a public body. Emerson was designated a blue ribbon school by the U.S. Department of Education less than 2 years ago, and I believe it was based upon a recommendation by the state Board of Education. The facts and the criteria that was used to get Emerson to be a blue ribbon school haven't changed. And the school district should not close a blue ribbon school. You've got, I forget the slide that shows, well, we're not going to close these schools because they're bing, bing, bing. You shouldn't close blue ribbon schools. In fact, you should emulate what Emerson has, and you should not eliminate it. I've got some questions, but I'm not going to hit, no. My time's up. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
I think he touched on my anger, the microphone's anger too, but that's what you're hearing from me is the frustration and the anger in this process, and then the finger pointing. I love a public school because there's accountability. We elect school board member, and we've had a heck of a time with our district superintendents. We're so grateful for Dr. Grant and believe there's a future and a hope. At the same time, she's walking into, we haven't heard anything that has relayed, as everyone has said, we're leaving more confused than when we got here. And it's angering. It's very, very angering. And to feel silenced is very angering. Now, my concern comes back to the G5 everybody talks about. And we elect our elected school board members. We have no clue who you are. And I mean, I believe in a representative government, but we have no faith, I'm sorry, into your program. There isn't analytic. There should be qualitative data, and we should be able to figure out how we got to the number 12. I mean, my kids can add to 12. It shouldn't be a big discussion. It should just be known. We should know. And with that, you are making some serious recommendations moving forward. And in the policy itself, it says, in the G5, part of the vote that came from the August, or from the school potential further study, came from the G5 policy, which kept getting referred to, and they said establishing recommended options. You didn't establish options. You said 7 schools would be ideal to close, and then you recommended studying 7 schools. Then it says in July, information from the options committee and comment from each affected school is reported to the board, which you did your job, sure. Then in August, the board must, the key word is must, approve any recommended options for boundary changes for further study. A, if the board approves the recommended option to the further study. So whatever they recommended to you, your policy is saying you must accept it, so for further study. Now we get to this second phase. So now we figured out first phase, flawed. None of us who understand how you came up with your holistic approach, you didn't really do things that were best for the community, because if you did, you would notice that your reboundaried and your different quadrants landed 4 schools in the central city to be closed, which is absolutely insane. Then you say in the G5 that we're going to hear all about next, is that then the next step of the process refers back to the above section 1, the one where we said must. And it says, how is the board supposed to act? Because a long-term school closure necessitates boundary adjustments. If a long-term school closure is being contemplated, one comprehensive process, which I assume this is the comprehensive process, will be run to address the school closure and boundary adjustment proposals. The process will follow the timelines and procedures outlined in section 1, which said you must take the recommendations of you, and we have no idea who you are. We elected them. We didn't elect you. And now it's this finger pointing, and it's a really angering process from the public. It is not necessarily, I'm angry at you. I'm angry at this process because it's so fundamental to me that it's not transparent, it's more confusing, and you keep pointing fingers, and your own written words are going to land us in the same position that we ended in August. And I really want you to really consider how many options you put forth. If you say 7 schools would be the ideal numbers, and then you only present 7 schools, what are we supposed to think? Then you get your 7 schools. Now we don't know if it's 0 or maybe 7 or whatever, but whatever your option, whatever your committee, the secret committee does, these people have to listen to because it's policy. And that's what we're going to keep hearing. And it's unfair, it's wrong, and there has to be a stop to this. You cannot come and gut our communities like this without input.
Thank you for sharing. I would like to just, I do want to address one point. I don't believe I ever said 7 is the ideal number to close. I don't believe that I ever did say that. But that's not true. But again, I said, what I alluded to there was if you close more than about 7 or 8, then you're going to have more than about 470, 475 per school. No, no, that isn't ideal to me. We put a range in there too. We also said in there 400 to 550 on one of the slides. I'm going to move on with the last 2, but that's the only part that I wanted to. I do appreciate you sharing your comments and also your passion for this. We appreciate it.
Hi, I'm a parent of a kindergartner who just started at Wasatch Elementary, and I have 2 more kids who are going to be starting at Wasatch Elementary in the next 3 years. And my husband and I, yay! My husband and I moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago, specifically because we were looking for a neighborhood that had a neighborhood feel, was close to downtown, that our kids could walk to school, and the lower avenues hit all those marks because of Wasatch. And if you close it, then we're not going to have that anymore. And I feel angry too, and when I get angry, I cry, so I apologize for crying. It's just what I do when I feel really emotional about things, angry or otherwise. And it's just not fair to the kids to take away their community school and bus them across, the other side of the Capitol to Washington or up the giant hill to like the upper avenues. Children should be able to go where they live with the people that they live with, and they shouldn't have to be bussed all over the place because Salt Lake City is failing getting families to want to stay here. And I feel like instead of talking about shrinking our schools, we should talk about how we can get more families wanting to come. And if you close the schools, then you're going to create this cycle where even more families move away. And that's not fair.
Thank you for sharing your comments.
I have one question. Why do you care about a child's education? By keeping Ensign open, you are making kids wake up much earlier than they are used to, and making them, if their parents can't take them to school one day, let's say their parents working the ER shift at the hospital, and their parents going in all night and can't get their kid to school, and their kid has to walk across South Temple, up a huge hill, really early in the morning to take like an hour-long walk, when really they could walk to Wasatch within like 20 minutes, or a much shorter amount of time. Or they could take the city buses. It's much easier to get to Wasatch. And you guys are complaining about having bus driver shortages. No wonder nobody wants to work for the district. You guys are closing 7 schools, busing more kids in and out. Busing so many kids in will just create a bigger bus driver problem. Being a bus driver can be fun, and it cannot. My dad was a bus driver a while ago, and it was a good job for a little bit of time. But also, it doesn't pay well enough to support like a 4-person family. But also, if you close down Ensign and have those kids come to Wasatch, and you kept Benyon open, which can hold like 600 kids, and you closed down some of the more like in the middle of the neighborhood schools and had those kids come to the closer schools that are in the valley, that can work much better. So instead of having kids walk up a big hill and sure let's say they ate a good breakfast, they burn all of those calories walking up a huge hill. So what do you get left with? Tired and hangry students who don't want to learn. Kids already don't love going to school. It's not their favorite thing to do. Why add tiredness and hangriness onto that?
Thank you for your comment. And as my mom was a bus driver for 10 years, so there's probably a connection or two there that all of us, that 6 degrees of separation. Sometimes that happens. You can see and you can hear this was a wonderful opportunity for people to share comments, questions, concerns, share their perspective. And it isn't easy. As a 25-year veteran in this district, at schools from Northwest Middle School to Uinta Elementary to many schools that I served as school support, to having my own 4 children be products of Salt Lake City School District, to have my 2 stepchildren currently products of Salt Lake City School District. I get that there is a whole lot at play here and a whole lot of people wanting to share their point of view, and we appreciate that. That is part of the study. Part of it is community input, and we value that, and we thank you for your time to do that. We also value what those other pieces are. We do have a policy with administrative procedures in place. We can love them, we can hate them, we can say this is what's wrong with it, here's what's not, but we are bound to carry through to the best of our ability what we have in that policy, and also try to do it in a way that includes all of the perspectives, some of who we heard tonight. We do have future meetings coming up. We have 4 more. One of those 4 will be primarily Spanish with an English translator there, and those sheets are back there. We do have translation services available also for we know that most of our families are either English or speaking or Spanish speaking, but that sure doesn't include everybody in our very culturally rich, diverse district that we have. And so I do encourage you that if you know of people that need translation services, the number is on that. The way to get that is also on that piece of paper as well. And we encourage your comments moving forward. Thank you. It will be, if not 100%, it'll be mostly this. As we get some more data, if we can, what we can get and we can start sharing, we will. But also, we are recording all of these. We are, right? It's a live stream. We will have it on the YouTube, a link to it. Yeah, oh, it's already up. There you go. I didn't know if it was being recorded then put up or, yeah, see. That's not my wheelhouse, that technology end. But
one quick note on that, our tech folks let me know that there were a couple minutes where the internet went out, so there's a blip in the middle, but the majority of the meeting will be there.
Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you being here tonight.